The thing I remember most clearly about that Tuesday is the coffee. Station coffee, burnt and bitter, the kind that sits on the warmer for 3 hours until it turns into something closer to tar. I was pouring my second cup at 6:47 p.m. when dispatch patched through the first call that didn't make sense. A woman on Delancey screaming about her husband biting their neighbor. Not hitting, biting. I remember thinking domestic disturbance, PCP maybe, bath salts. I set the coffee down and never picked it up again. My name is Marcus Buell. I'd been a patrol sergeant with the Crandall Township Police Department for 11 years. Our station sat on the corner of Polk and 7th, a 2-story brick building constructed in 1974, renovated poorly in 2003. 22 officers on the roster, though we never had more than 8 on shift at once. That Tuesday evening, I was senior officer present. Lieutenant Caro had left at 5. Captain Dominic was at a township council meeting across town. The building held me. Officers Rivera and Cho on patrol readiness. Officer Dennings running the desk. And our dispatcher, Maura Cleese, in her glass-walled booth behind the front counter. Down in holding, we had 2 occupants. A DUI pickup from that afternoon, a middle school teacher named Gavin something, who'd blown a .14 and was sleeping it off. And a man named Tull Rackman, picked up on an outstanding warrant for aggravated assault and failure to appear. Rackman had been with us since Monday. He was waiting for transfer to county. I'll get to Rackman. Everyone who survived that week will tell you about one person who made things worse than they needed to be. Rackman was mine. The second call came at 6:52. A man on Route 9 reporting a multi-car pileup with people attacking each other outside their vehicles. Rivera and Cho looked at me. I told them to take 1 cruiser, assess the Route 9 situation, radio back. Standard. They grabbed their jackets and walked out the side door into the parking lot. I watched them through the window as they pulled out, lights spinning blue against the early dark. That was the last time I saw either of them alive. For the next 40 minutes, the calls accelerated. Maura's board lit up in a way I'd never seen. Not the orderly blinking of a busy Friday night, but a cascading rush. 6 lines ringing simultaneously, then 8, then all 12. She answered them in rotation, her voice steady at first, then tightening. I stood behind her booth and listened to fragments. A man saying his daughter was dead but still moving. A woman locked in her bathroom hearing something in the hallway. An elderly voice asking if the police knew about the people in the street who weren't walking right. I tried Rivera on the radio at 7:15. Static. Tried Cho's cell. Voicemail. Tried the Route 9 call again. Nothing. At 7:22, I called Captain Dominic. He picked up on the 6th ring. Said the council meeting had dissolved because people were leaving. Said there was something on the news. He told me he'd be at the station in 20 minutes. I said copy and hung up. He never arrived. At 7:30, Maura pulled off her headset and turned to face me through the glass. Her eyes were wide, but her hands were flat on the desk, controlled. She said, "Marcus, the lines are all dead. Every one." I walked around and checked. She was right. Not busy signals, dead air. The landlines had dropped. I picked up the desk phone in the lobby. Same thing. Our cell phones still worked, barely, though coverage was cutting in and out. I sent a text to Lieutenant Caro. Situation at station unclear, please advise. The message showed delivered, but I never got a response. At 7:40, the first person came to the door. A woman in a jogging outfit, mid-40s, blood on her right sleeve. She was crying and banging on the glass front doors, saying something I couldn't hear. Dennings buzzed her in. She collapsed on the lobby bench and told us between gasps that a man had attacked her in the park 3 blocks away, that he'd bitten her arm, that she'd kicked him off and run. She said other people in the park were screaming. She said something was wrong with the man's face. His jaw, she said. His jaw was wrong. I examined her arm under the fluorescent lobby light. A human bite mark, deep enough to bleed through the fabric. I got the first aid kit from behind the desk and cleaned it, wrapped it. Asked her name. Carla Bream. Asked if she needed an ambulance. She said yes, but when I tried to dial, there was nothing. Between 7:40 and 9, 11 more people came through our doors. A couple from the apartment complex on 8th Street. A man and his teenage son from the gas station on Polk who said the attendant had gone crazy and attacked a customer. A woman carrying a toddler who wouldn't stop apologizing. 3 college-age kids, 2 male, 1 female, who'd been walking to a bar and seen a crowd of people staggering down Maple Avenue. A retired firefighter named Cyrus Pennell, who arrived calmly, carrying a scanner he'd been monitoring, and told me with flat certainty that the emergency channels were chaos. And one more officer, Patrolman Went, who came in through the side door still in his civvies, having heard the scanner traffic at home and driven in on instinct. Went was pale. He told me on the way in he'd passed 2 people feeding on a body near the Dollar General on 5th. Feeding, he said. Eating. I asked if he was sure. He just looked at me. By 9 o'clock, the station held 17 people. The sounds from outside had changed. Earlier it had been sirens in the distance, car horns, the ambient noise of a town going wrong. Now it was quieter in some directions and louder in others. Sporadic screams, some close. A car alarm that ran for 20 minutes and then stopped mid-cycle. And beneath it all, a kind of shuffling percussion that I couldn't identify until I looked out the second-floor window and saw them. There were maybe 30 figures on 7th Street, moving west in a loose cluster. Their gait was unmistakable once you saw it. Not drunk, not injured. Something else. A mechanical persistence, heads tilted, arms slack, feet dragging but never stopping. They passed under the streetlight outside the station, and I could see dark stains on their clothes, on their faces. One of them was wearing a hospital gown. I pulled back from the window and went downstairs. Everyone was in the lobby, standing or sitting, looking at me. I was the only uniformed officer present besides Went, and Went was 5 months out of the academy. He was looking at me too. I remember the exact moment I made the decision. I looked at the front doors. Glass, double-paned, locked, but glass. I looked at the side entrance. Solid steel, card access. I looked at the back exit, the fire door that opened into the alley behind the building. 3 ways in. 3 ways we could be reached. I said, "We're locking down." The next hour was controlled chaos. Went and I secured the side entrance and the fire exit. The fire door was already alarmed, steel core, opened outward. Decent. The side door was solid, but the frame was older, and the card reader was electronic, dependent on the building's power supply. I found the manual bolt behind the access panel and threw it. The front doors were the problem. Commercial glass, the kind that's reinforced but not bulletproof. I had Went and Cyrus Pennell drag 2 filing cabinets from the admin office and wedge them against the doors, then stack the lobby chairs on top. It wouldn't stop anything determined, but it would slow entry and make noise. While we worked, I could hear Tull Rackman shouting from holding. His voice carried up the stairwell. The cells were on the ground floor, rear of the building, separated from the main hallway by a locked security door. He was yelling about his rights, about being forgotten, about what he'd do to us if we left him in there. I ignored him for the moment. The station layout matters because everything that happened next was shaped by it. Ground floor. Front lobby with Mora's dispatch booth. 2 interview rooms off the main hallway, a break room with a kitchenette, the sergeant's office, mine, the holding area with 4 cells, and the evidence room behind a steel door with a combo lock. Second floor, the squad room with 8 desks, Captain Dominic's office, the small conference room, the records room, and the armory. A 10 by 12 space with a reinforced door and an electronic lock that also had a physical key. I had that key on my ring. I gathered everyone in the squad room upstairs. 17 faces in mismatched states of shock. The jogger, Carla, was cradling her wrapped arm and had gone gray. The couple from 8th Street held hands and didn't speak. The teenage boy sat against the wall with his knees up, staring at nothing. The 3 college kids whispered among themselves. Cyrus Pennell leaned against a desk with his arms crossed, watching me. Mara stood by her dispatch booth doorway, having come up with us after confirming the phones were useless. Went stood beside me, trying to look composed. I told them what I knew, which wasn't much. That there appeared to be a widespread violent disturbance, that communications were down, that emergency services were not responding, that the station was the safest place available to us right now, and that we would remain here until we could establish contact with other authorities or until the situation resolved. I used cop language, measured and vague. I don't know how convincing it was. The father, his name was Dale Pervins, asked what was happening to the people outside. Was it a disease? Was it terrorism? I told him I didn't know. One of the college kids, a tall, red-headed young man named Colton, said it was obvious what it was, that he wasn't stupid, that those people outside were dead and walking. The room went silent. The woman with the toddler started crying. Cyrus Pennell spoke up. His voice was low and level, carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd spent 30 years running into burning buildings. He said the boy was right, that his scanner had picked up National Guard activation codes before the frequencies went dead, that this was bigger than our town. He said we should take inventory, secure what we could, and plan for the possibility that no one was coming for us tonight. I could have resented him for stepping on my authority. I didn't. He was right, and his calm helped. That first night, I opened the armory. 8 Glock 17 service pistols in the rack, plus the 2 that Went and I already carried. 4 Remington 870 shotguns, 1 AR-15 patrol rifle. Ammunition, roughly 400 rounds of 9mm, 100 shells of 12-gauge buckshot, 60 rounds of .223. Body armor, 6 vests. The inventory felt enormous in that small room, and completely inadequate at the same time. I distributed 2 shotguns, one to Cyrus, who handled it like he'd been born holding one, and one to Dale Pervins after confirming he had firearms experience. I kept the AR and gave Went a shotgun. The remaining weapons stayed locked. I told the group that we'd maintain a watch rotation and reassess in the morning. Then I went downstairs to deal with Rackman. He was standing at the bars when I came through the security door, both hands wrapped around the steel, his face pressed between them. Tull Rackman was 43, 6'2", heavily built, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. He'd been arrested for beating a man unconscious outside a bar, in what witnesses described as a sustained assault that continued well after the victim stopped moving. He had priors in 3 states. He looked at me and said, "You're going to leave me in here to die." I said, "No one's dying tonight." He laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "I can hear them outside. I can hear what's happening. You lock me in a cage while the world ends? That's murder, officer." I told him the situation was under control, that the station was secure. that he was safer in that cell than most people in town right now. All of which was true. He didn't care about true. He wanted out. "Open this door," he said. "You don't have the right to keep me here during this. No court, no system. You know it's gone. Open the door and give me a chance." I said no and went back upstairs. That night, no one slept properly. We spread out between the squad room and the conference room, using coats and chair cushions as bedding. I took the first watch, sitting by the second-floor window with the AR across my knees, looking out at 7th Street. The group of figures I'd seen earlier had dispersed, but others moved through the intersection sporadically, singles and pairs, drawn by sounds I couldn't identify. Once, around 2 a.m., something hit the front door downstairs. A single, heavy impact. I went down with my flashlight. One of them stood on the other side of the glass, pressing against it with both palms flat, its mouth opening and closing. A man in a delivery uniform, or what had been one. The left side of his neck was torn open in a way that should have meant immediate death from blood loss. Dark fluid ran down the inside of his collar. His eyes tracked my flashlight beam. I turned the light off and went back upstairs. The glass held. Morning came gray and cold. We had no heat. The building ran on a gas furnace, and the system had shut down overnight, either from a gas supply interruption or the electronic thermostat losing its mind. The break room yielded what I'd expected: a refrigerator with leftover lunches, condiment packets, 6 bottles of water, a case of off-brand soda, a box of granola bars, and a bag of pretzels. Combined with what people had in their pockets and bags, a few protein bars, a bag of trail mix the college kids had, a pack of crackers from the woman with the toddler, we had maybe 2 days of food, if rationed aggressively. Water was a more immediate problem. The building's water still ran that first morning, but the pressure was low. I had everyone fill every container we could find: coffee pots, the water cooler jug, a mop bucket that we cleaned out. Cyrus suggested filling the toilet tanks and covering them. Smart. We did. By mid-morning, I could see a clearer picture outside. The intersection of Polk and 7th had been empty at dawn, but by 10 o'clock, figures accumulated. They drifted in ones and twos, then lingered. They seemed drawn to areas of recent activity. 7 of them stood in a loose semicircle near the front of the station by noon. They didn't bang on the doors. They just stood there, occasionally shifting weight, heads listing. Maura called me over to the dispatch booth around 11. She'd been trying every frequency on our radio system, all dead or static. Then she found one, a faint, repeating loop on a frequency I didn't recognize. A recorded male voice. To designated collection points. National Guard elements are establishing safe zones at the following locations. Crandall Township residents proceed to Crandall High School on, and then it cut out, looped, started again. Same fragment, same cut. She couldn't pull the full message. Crandall High School was 8 blocks north. 8 blocks through streets I could see from the upstairs window were scattered with walking dead. I filed the information and said nothing to the group yet. That afternoon, Rackman started yelling again. He'd been quiet through the morning, which should have concerned me more than it did. When I went down to check on him, I brought him water and 2 granola bars. Whatever else he was my responsibility. He was sitting on his cot with a look I recognized from years of handling angry men. The quiet kind of anger. The kind that's done calculating. He took the food and water, then said, "How many of you up there?" I didn't answer. 17, he said. "I can hear you walking." Counted the footsteps. He ate a granola bar in 2 bites. 2 days of food, I figure. Maybe less. "How long you think those front doors hold?" I said, Long enough. Glass doors, he said. I saw them when they brought me in. Glass and aluminum frame. 160-pound body walking into that at 3 miles an hour. Maybe it holds. 10 bodies? 20? You've got a material science problem, officer. And you've got a head count problem. 17 people eating through your rations. 18, counting me. He looked up at me. You need me out of here, and you need fewer mouths in this building. I can help with one of those things. You figure out the other. I left without responding, but the math was already running in my head. That's the thing about someone like Rackman. He wasn't wrong. He was never exactly wrong. He just used true things in a way that moved you toward what he wanted. Day 2. The water pressure dropped to a trickle by noon, then stopped entirely. We'd collected enough to last perhaps 3 days if carefully managed, less with 17 people. The toddler needed more than her share, and nobody was going to argue with that. I set up a rationing system. Half a cup per person every 4 hours, meals twice a day. If you could call a granola bar split 3 ways a meal. Carla Bream, the jogger, was getting worse. Her bite wound had swollen overnight, hot and red, and by the second morning she'd developed a fever. She sat in the conference room wrapped in someone's jacket, shivering. I checked her wound and smelled something sweet and rotten underneath the gauze. She looked at me and said, I know what this means. I told her it might be a normal infection, that we had antibiotics in the first aid kit. She shook her head and said, Marcus, I know. I gave her the antibiotics anyway, 2 capsules of amoxicillin every 8 hours. It was what I had. That afternoon, a decision found me. A van pulled up on 7th Street, fast, horn blaring, and 3 people spilled out and ran toward our front doors. The noise drew every figure within earshot. I watched from the 2nd-floor window as a dozen of them converged on the intersection, moving faster than I'd seen before, a stumbling jog that chilled me. The 3 people reached our barricaded entrance and started pounding, screaming to be let in. I went downstairs. Went was already there, shotgun up, looking at me for direction. Through the gap between the filing cabinets, I could see their faces. A middle-aged man, a younger woman, and another man with blood soaking his left leg from thigh to ankle. Behind them, the dead were 40 yards away and closing. 17 people already. Water for 3 days. Food for less. I shoved the filing cabinets aside and opened the door. They came in, gasping. The injured man, his name was Dev, I learned later, collapsed on the lobby floor. The wound on his leg was a gash, not a bite. He'd caught it on torn metal climbing a fence. The woman, his sister Priya, confirmed this, frantic. The older man was a stranger to them, someone they'd picked up 2 blocks ago who'd flagged down their van. His name was Aldous Greaves. He was 61, an accountant, and within an hour he'd positioned himself as the voice of everyone's worst impulses. Not Rackman. Rackman was a known quantity, a criminal, a caged variable. Greaves was the other kind of problem, the kind who wraps selfishness in the language of reason. He was polite, soft-spoken, and relentless. Within 30 minutes of entering the station, Greaves had toured the building uninvited, assessed our supplies without asking permission, and started a conversation with 3 other civilians about whether the rationing system was fair. By evening, he'd planted the idea that the officers, Vent and I, were hoarding resources. He said this calmly, as a concern, not an accusation. I just think transparency would help everyone feel more secure, he said to the group, sitting in the squad room with his hands folded. I opened the break room for him, showed him every item, the empty shelves, the carefully measured water containers with their markers showing remaining volume. His face didn't change. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate that." And then, quieter, to Dale Purvins as he walked away. "Did you notice the evidence room is locked? What's in there?" The evidence room contained case files, sealed drug exhibits, personal property bags, and nothing useful for survival. I told him this. He nodded pleasantly and said of course. On the morning of day 3, Carla Bream died. She deteriorated overnight. Her fever spiked to what felt like 104 or 105. We had no thermometer, just touch. And her breathing became ragged, then very slow, then stopped. It happened at 4:12 a.m. while the college girl, whose name was Shayla, was sitting with her. Shayla came running up to the squad room where I was sleeping and shook my shoulder. I got up and went to the conference room with my sidearm drawn. I knew. Everyone in that building knew by then what a bite meant, even if nobody wanted to be the one to say it plainly. Carla lay on the floor, still, not breathing. I cleared the room. I waited. Went stood in the doorway behind me, his breathing loud in the silence. We waited 11 minutes. Then her fingers twitched. I shot her once, in the head, from 4 feet away. The sound of that gunshot inside the building was enormous. It echoed through the hallways and stairwell. Everyone came running or screaming or both. The toddler shrieked. Rackman hollered from his cell. I stood there with the pistol still extended and a spray of Carla Bream's blood on the conference room wall and explained what had happened in 5 words or less. Then I went downstairs and sat in my sergeant's office and waited for the ringing in my ears to stop. Cyrus found me there 10 minutes later. He sat down across from my desk, the desk where I'd written reports and filled out overtime slips for a decade, and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "You made the right call. Everyone knows it, even if they don't want to say it." I said, "That's the first time I ever discharged my weapon outside a range." He nodded. We sat in silence for another minute. Then I heard Greaves upstairs, his voice carrying down the stairwell, saying something about how the gunshot would attract more of them, how the officers had endangered everyone, how decisions were being made without consultation. Cyrus looked at the ceiling and then back at me. "You want me to talk to him?" "No," I said. "I'll handle it." I went up and addressed the group directly. Told them that Carla's bite had been fatal, that she'd turned, that I'd done what was necessary. Told them the gunshot was regrettable but unavoidable. Told them that from now on, anyone bitten would be monitored in isolation. The toddler's mother asked what isolation meant. I said the interview rooms. She clutched her child tighter. I didn't blame her. Greaves spoke up, not loudly, never loudly. He said maybe the group should vote on protocols going forward, that in the absence of a functioning legal system, decisions affecting everyone should be made collectively. He looked around the room. "We're not prisoners here," he said. "Some of us are civilians. We deserve a voice. Here's what I did wrong." I agreed. I told him fine, we'd discuss major decisions as a group, but operational security remained with me. He smiled and said that sounded reasonable. I'd given him exactly what he wanted: a platform, a mechanism for challenge. Every choice I made from that point could be relitigated in front of 20 frightened people. The head count was 19 now, counting Rackman. 1 dead. 20 had entered the building. 19 remained. Day 3 brought new sounds from outside. A helicopter in the distance, southbound, visible for 10 seconds through the second-floor window before it disappeared behind the tree line. It didn't slow, didn't circle. Whatever it was doing, it had nothing to do with us. That same afternoon, a sustained burst of gunfire erupted maybe 6 blocks east. Military caliber by the sound, full automatic. It lasted 15 seconds, then stopped. The figures on our street turned toward the sound and began drifting east, which was a relief until they returned an hour later in greater numbers, accompanied by others drawn from whatever had happened. By evening, I counted over 40 of them visible from the upstairs windows. They milled in a slow orbit around the intersection, occasionally bumping into each other, sometimes stopping entirely for minutes before resuming their aimless circulation. Several of them wore uniforms. Hospital scrubs, a UPS jacket, what appeared to be a police uniform from another jurisdiction. One of them, a woman in a torn yellow dress, still had a purse hanging from her elbow. Inside, the atmosphere had curdled. The cramped quarters, the inadequate food, the death of Carla, all of it compounded into a pervasive misery that sat on the building like weight. The college kids kept to themselves, speaking in whispers. Dale and his son sat together, Dale cleaning the shotgun repeatedly, the boy staring at nothing. The couple from 8th Street had barely spoken since arriving. Dev's leg wound was stabilized with butterfly closures from the first aid kit, but he couldn't walk without support, which Priya provided silently. And Greaves circulated. He didn't do it obviously. He'd sit near someone, make quiet conversation, then move on. I watched him speak with the older man from the van, the one whose name I never properly caught, and then with Colton, the red-headed college kid, and then with the mother of the toddler. Small conversations, quiet voices. I could rarely hear the content, only the pattern. That evening, I went down to Rackman again, brought him his rations. He took them without complaint and said, "The shot this morning. Someone turned?" I confirmed. He leaned back on his cot. "How many more of your people are bitten?" "Nobody else was bitten." "You sure? You checked everyone?" I hadn't. I realized it instantly and hated that he'd been the one to make me see it. I said I'd address it. "Or," Rackman said, "you could let me out and I could help you. Another set of hands, another strong back for the barricades. I'm not what you need me to be, Sergeant. I'm not a monster. I hit a man who was hurting a woman. Repeatedly, yes, more than I should have. But I'm not a danger to your group. I'm a danger to whatever tries to come through those doors." I said, "You're in custody pending transfer." "Transfer where?" He said it gently, almost sympathetically. "What county jail? What court system?" "You think any of that's still there?" I didn't answer. I went back up and organized an inspection, made everyone show their skin, arms, legs, torso, back of the neck. Embarrassing for them, necessary for me. Everyone was clean. No bites, no scratches from the dead. I felt relief I hadn't earned. Day 4 broke something. The power went out at 3:17 a.m. One moment the fluorescent hallway lights were humming their familiar hum, the next, complete darkness and silence. The building's emergency system kicked on, giving us dim red lighting in the stairwells and the exit signs, but everything else was black. The furnace, already struggling, went cold permanently. The electronic locks, including the armory, defaulted to locked position, which was fine because I had the physical key. But the security cameras, the exterior lights that had kept our perimeter somewhat visible at night, the dispatch computer, the radio system's remaining power, all gone. I had 3 flashlights in the building. 3. One in my belt, one in the patrol car Went had never taken, one in the maintenance closet. We supplemented with cell phone lights, but batteries were draining and there was no way to charge them. In the darkness, people panicked. The toddler screamed, the mother screamed. Someone knocked over a stack of chairs in the squad room and went, very nearly shot in the direction of the sound. I shouted for calm, used my flashlight to sweep the room, and counted heads. Everyone present. No breach. But the darkness changed us. You could feel it in the morning, even after dawn brought gray light through the windows. People were different. The veneer of cooperation, already thin, wore through. Arguments started over small things. Who'd used more than their share of water? Who was sleeping too close to someone else? Whether the window in Captain Dominic's office should be opened for air or kept closed for security. Greaves chose that morning to make his move. He convened a meeting. That's the word he used, convened, as if he had the authority. In the squad room, and laid out his position calmly. The officers, he said, controlled the armory, the food, the water, and the decisions. The civilians outnumbered the officers. The civilians had not elected anyone. He proposed a council. 3 civilians, 1 officer. Decisions by majority. I watched the faces in the room. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked persuaded. Cyrus, leaning against the far wall, caught my eye and gave a small shake of his head. But Colton, the college kid, spoke up in support. So did the man whose name I never caught. The mother of the toddlers said she just wanted someone to explain things before they happened, instead of after. I could have shut it down. I had the weapons, the keys, the training. In the old world, I would have cited authority, and that would have been sufficient. But the old world's currency was worthless now, and I could see the room tilting. So I compromised again. I agreed to a daily briefing where I'd share information and hear concerns. No council. No vote overriding security decisions. But transparency. Open discussion. I'm not your enemy, I said. None of you are my prisoners. Greaves smiled his small smile and said that was a start. Rackman, in his cell, heard none of this, or all of it, through the floors and walls. When I brought him his rations that afternoon, he said, "Losing them, aren't you?" "I'm not losing anyone." "The accountant, the one with the quiet voice. He's a coyote, Sergeant. I know the type. Spent my whole life around them. In prison, in the system. The ones who don't shout, who build coalitions, who smile while they move the pieces. You know what I am. I'm up front about it. He'll bury you politely." I said, "You don't know anything about what's happening upstairs." "I know what power sounds like when it's shifting. I can hear it in how they walk." I left. He called after me. "Day 5, day 6. You'll come back and ask me different. I'll be here." Day 5. The dead outside had grown to what I estimated at 60 or 70, though counting was difficult because they moved, drifted, overlapped. The front barricade, filing cabinets, chairs, the lobby bench shoved against the doors, had held against the passive pressure of bodies leaning on glass, but that morning I noticed a crack. A single fracture line running diagonally across the left door panel, floor to eye level. Something had hit it in the night, or the sustained pressure had found a stress point. I pulled Vent and Cyrus aside and showed them. We discussed options in whispers. The conference room had a solid wood table, 6 feet long and heavy. We could upend it against the glass. Beyond that, we had the doors to the interview rooms, solid core, removable from hinges, which could be laid flat across the glass as reinforcement. It would take time and noise was the enemy. We worked in the early afternoon, when the cluster outside seemed to thin slightly. Even so, the sound of us moving furniture drew attention. I watched through the narrowing gap between barricade and wall as 3 of them turned toward the front doors and approached. They pressed against the glass, against our new reinforcement, and the crack didn't spread. But they didn't leave either. They stayed there, palms flat, mouths working silently, for the rest of the day. That afternoon, I made a decision I'd been avoiding. I pulled Vent into my office and told him about the radio fragment. The National Guard, Crandall High School. 8 blocks. I asked him what he thought. He said, "That recording could be days old. The school could be overrun." Could be. 8 blocks is a long way with 60 of them between here and there. I know. But we're running out of water tomorrow. Day after at the latest. I know that too. We agreed not to tell the group yet. I'd go up to the roof, accessible through a ceiling hatch in the records room, and try to get a visual on the school. If I could see signs of life, activity, military presence, then we'd have something to plan toward. I climbed up at dusk. The roof was flat, tarred, with a low parapet wall. I crouched and moved to the north edge. From there, I could see down 7th Street for 4 blocks before it curved. Beyond the curve, the town rose slightly, and Crandall High School sat on a mild elevation, its flat modern roof visible above the residential roof lines. I squinted in the dying light. Nothing. No lights. No movement I could distinguish from the general drift of figures in the streets. No vehicles, no barriers, no signs of organized presence. The school was dark and silent like everything else. I came down and said nothing to anyone. That night, in the full dark, no power, no city glow from outside, just the red pinprick of the exit signs running on battery backup, I heard something different from Rackman's cell. Not shouting, singing. Low and tuneless, some country song I half recognized, the words mumbled except for the chorus which came through clear. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. Over and over, quiet, almost peaceful. It was more unsettling than his usual hostility. Day 6. Water was critically low. I measured what remained in the containers, approximately 4 gallons. 20 people. That was less than a day's worth even at severe rationing. The toilet tanks held another 6 gallons or so of technically clean water. After that, nothing. Greaves forced the issue in the morning briefing. He stood and said calmly that people had a right to know the timeline. I told them the truth. I said we had perhaps 2 days of water remaining, that I had information suggesting a possible military collection point at the high school, but could not verify it was still operational, and that I was developing a plan for either resupply or relocation. The room erupted. Not in the screaming chaos of a movie, but in the ugly, overlapping way real panic sounds. Everyone talking at once. Dale saying we should make a run for it now, today, while we had the strength. The mother saying she couldn't take her baby out there. Colton saying the military was probably already gone. Dev saying he couldn't walk 8 blocks on his leg. And Priya saying she wouldn't leave him. Greaves, the center of his own constructed storm, waited for a lull and said, "I think we need to discuss who goes and who stays. Because not all of us can make that run. Some of us are liabilities." He looked at Dev. Priya stood up so fast her chair fell. "He is not a liability. He is my brother." Greaves raised his hands. "I'm not suggesting we abandon anyone. I'm saying we need to be realistic about capacity. If a group moves toward the school, it needs to be the fastest and most capable. The rest stay here with supplies until the advance group can send help back." It sounded reasonable. It was designed to sound reasonable, but what he was actually proposing was a split. One group with resources and mobility, another left behind in a building with cracking glass and no water. And I could see, clearly, which group Greaves intended to be in. I shut it down. I said we would go together or not at all. That splitting the group reduced everyone's chances. That 20 people moving in formation with armed escorts was safer than 10 people moving fast and 10 people waiting to die. Greaves yielded with a nod and a, "You're the expert." But the seed was planted. I saw it in how people looked at Dev, at the mother and toddler, at the 8th Street couple who were both in their 60s. The calculus of who slowed us down had entered the room, and it wasn't leaving. That afternoon, I did something I'd told myself I wouldn't do. I went downstairs, unlocked the security door, walked to Rackman's cell, and stood there for a long time without speaking. He sat on his cot, watching me, patient. He knew. I said, "If I open this cell, what do you do?" He said, "I carry things. I hit things. I watch your back while you watch the front. Same thing I'd do if you'd let me out 3 days ago." And when this is over? There is no over, Sergeant. You know that. The world we left is gone. Whatever's next, I'll find my place in it. And I'll owe you for the chance. You don't owe me anything. This isn't a favor. I need another body between the door and the people I'm protecting. He stood. He was taller than me by 3 inches and outweighed me by 40 pounds. In the dim red emergency light, his scar looked black. He said, "Then open the door." I opened the door. The group's reaction was what I expected. Fear, anger, protest. Dale moved his son behind him. The college kids retreated to the far wall. Greaves, and this was revealing, said nothing. Watched. Measured. Rackman stood in the squad room with his hands visible at his sides and said nothing either. I told the group that Rackman was now under my supervision, that he would assist with security and manual labor, that he remained unarmed, and that I was responsible for his behavior. Cyrus came up to me afterward and said quietly, "That was either smart or the end of us." I said, "Possibly both." Rackman proved himself within hours. That evening, the crack in the front glass door spread. A second fracture line appeared, branching from the first. The dead outside were pressing now, 7 or 8 of them in constant contact with the glass, and behind them more accumulating. The sound was a low, continuous grinding. Rackman and I and Vent spent an hour in the dark, as quietly as we could, hauling the remaining furniture from the ground floor to reinforce the barricade. Rackman moved the heavy sergeant's desk by himself, angling it through the hallway without scraping the walls, setting it flush against the table we'd already positioned. He worked without speaking, without complaint, with an efficient economy of motion that spoke to hard physical labor somewhere in his past. When we finished, the front entrance was a solid mass of wood and metal 4 feet deep. Nothing was coming through quietly. But nothing was guaranteed either. Day 7 was when things came apart. The glass broke at 2:40 a.m. I was on watch, sitting in the downstairs hallway with the AR across my lap, when I heard the sound. A deep, percussive crunch, then a second, then a sustained crackling like ice breaking on a lake. I was on my feet and moving before the sound finished. My flashlight beam hit the barricade, and I could see the glass behind our reinforcement. Shattered, crumbling inward, held only by the mass we'd piled against it. Dead hands were reaching through the gaps at the top, above the desk, above the table, pale fingers grasping at air. I shouted for Went, shouted for everyone. Get up, get armed, now. The barricade held against the pressure, but it wouldn't hold forever. The dead were stacking against it now, driven by our noise, our light, the smell of us. I could hear more coming, That shuffling gait multiplied from all directions outside. Went arrived with his shotgun, then Cyrus, then Rackman. I told them we had minutes, maybe less. I made the call. We were leaving. The next 20 minutes were the most chaotic of my life, and I include in that comparison a decade of police work that put me in foot chases, bar fights, a shooting, and a high-speed pursuit that ended in a fatality. This was different. This was 19 people, in darkness, with 3 flashlights and insufficient weapons, trying to organize a coordinated exit from a building surrounded by the dead. The plan formed as I spoke it, no time for deliberation. The fire exit, rear of the building, opened into the alley behind the station. The alley ran north-south. North took us toward 7th Street, toward the Mass in front. South connected to a service road behind the strip of businesses on 6th. From there, we could cut through parking lots to 8th Street, then north on residential streets toward the school. I gave assignments in rapid order. Cyrus on point with the shotgun, Went rear guard, Rackman in the middle with the group, carrying Dev on his back. Rackman didn't wait for me to ask. He just went to Dev and said, "Arms around my neck, don't let go." Dale had his shotgun. The college boy Colton had one of the Glocks I'd distributed in the scramble. I took the AR and a spare magazine and positioned myself between Point and the main group. The mother was crying silently. The toddler clutched to her chest. The 8th Street couple held each other's hands with white knuckles. Priya stayed close to Rackman and her brother. Greaves was right behind Cyrus, I noticed. Close to the front. Close to the armed man. Positioning himself near safety, as always. I opened the fire exit. The alley was clear. Somehow, mercifully clear. The dead had concentrated on the front and sides of the building, drawn by the noise of the breaking glass. I ushered people through in pairs, whispering. Cyrus moved south, flashlight off, navigating by the faint ambient glow of a sky that held distant fires. We followed. The first 100 yards were silence and terror. Every footstep seemed to echo. The toddler whimpered once, and the mother clamped her hand over the child's mouth. A gesture I'll never forget for its tenderness and its desperation combined. Dev, on Rackman's back, made no sound. Rackman moved with the group, steady, his breathing controlled. Whatever else Tull Rackman was, he was physically capable in a way that mattered that night. We reached the service road. A delivery truck sat abandoned at an angle, its rear doors open, interior dark. Beyond it, the parking lot of a defunct Payless shoe source stretched empty under the sky. I swept left, swept right. Shapes moved at the far end of the lot, 4, 5 of them, shuffling between parked cars. They hadn't noticed us. We moved along the building wall, single file, staying in shadow. Cyrus set a pace that was quick, but sustainable for the slowest among us. The 8th Street couple, the mother with the toddler. I watched our flanks. Went watched behind. The figures at the lot's far end continued their aimless patrol. Then Greaves did something I will never forgive. We were crossing the open gap between the Payless and the next building. A dry cleaner shuddered, when he broke from the group and ran. Not away from us, not toward the dead. Forward. Ahead of Cyrus, ahead of Point, ahead of everyone. He ran diagonally across the parking lot toward a pickup truck parked near the road. A Ford with its driver's door hanging open, and he got in and pulled the door shut behind him. The sound of the truck door closing carried across the empty lot like a gunshot. Every head turned. The 5 figures at the far end turned. And from behind the dry cleaner, from around the corner of the building we hadn't been able to see past, more of them emerged. 8, 12. Coming toward the sound, toward us, in that horrible, stumbling run. I said, Move, now, together. Do not run. We walked fast, faster than we should have. The 8th Street couple fell behind by a step, 2 steps. Went grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her forward. The dead were 40 yards behind and closing the gap, but not quickly. Their coordination was poor, their gait unsteady. We could outpace them if we maintained discipline. But the group was fracturing. Colton sprinted ahead, disappearing around the corner of the next building. One of his friends followed. The other hesitated, looked back, then ran after them. Dale pushed his son ahead and turned, shotgun up, covering our retreat. I shouted at him to keep moving. He fired once, the blast enormous in the silent night, and one of the pursuing figures dropped. The rest didn't slow. The gunshot drew more. I could hear them now from multiple directions, the sound of gathering weight, of a town's worth of dead orienting on us. We moved through a residential street, fences on both sides, houses dark and still. I counted heads on the move. The 3 college kids were gone, ahead somewhere, split off. Greaves was gone in his truck. That left 14 of us, moving in a ragged column through someone's neighborhood, past tricycles and garden hoses and lives interrupted. 8 blocks. We'd covered maybe 2. 6 to go. The next 30 minutes exist in my memory as a series of fragments, sharp and disconnected. Cyrus leading us through a backyard, over a low fence, the older couple struggling to climb. Rackman setting Dev down on the other side and going back to lift the woman over bodily. A lone figure appearing in the window of a house as we passed. Not dead, alive. A face pressed to the glass watching us go by. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Dale's son. His name was Tyler, I learned it that night. Stumbling on a curb and going down. Dale picking him up, the boy's knee bleeding. The sound of the toddler, fully crying now, the mother unable to quiet her. Dead converging on the sound from a cross street, 6 of them, close. Me firing the AR twice, dropping 2, the others still coming. Went firing his shotgun, dropping another, the rest reaching us. Rackman. God help me, Rackman. He stepped forward with nothing in his hands. He stepped in front of the mother and child, and he grabbed the nearest one of them. A dead man in a mechanic's coverall, by the throat and the belt, and threw it sideways into the next one. They tangled and fell. The third reached for him, and he drove his fist into its face with a force that snapped its head back. It went down. It got up again, jaw hanging loose, and he hit it again and again until it stopped moving. He turned back to us with blood on his knuckles, their blood, black and wrong, and said, "Keep moving." I said, "Don't let that blood near your mouth or eyes." He wiped his hands on his pants and picked Dev up again without a word. 5 blocks from the school. 4. The streets were getting clearer, fewer dead in this direction, as if the concentration was behind us, around the station, drawn by whatever was happening there. I dared to hope. 3 blocks. I could see the school's roof line against the sky, dark against dark. And as we got closer, 2 blocks, I saw something that changed everything. Light. A floodlight on the school's east wall, powered by a generator, illuminating a section of the parking lot. And around that light, barriers, jersey walls, concertina wire, a checkpoint. I stopped the group and looked through the AR's optic. Military vehicles, 2 Humvees and a 5-ton truck. Figures behind the barriers, upright, alert, armed. The posture of the living, the disciplined stillness of people on guard. "It's there," I said. "It's real." We covered the last 2 blocks in the open, on the street, me waving the flashlight overhead, shouting, identifying myself. "Crandall Township Police. Civilians with me.
Need assistance. The response came as a spotlight swinging toward us, blinding, and a bullhorn voice commanding us to stop, raise our hands, approach slowly. We approached. One at a time, they checked us.
Looked at our skin with flashlights. Asked when we'd last been bitten or scratched. Asked our names. Separated us into groups for further screening. The toddler's mother was sobbing with relief. The 8th Street couple sat on the asphalt inside the perimeter and held each other. Dale kept his arm around Tyler. Priya and Dev were taken to a medical tent. Cyrus shook my hand, once, firmly, and said nothing. Went stood beside me and said, "We made it." I said, "Not all of us." The 3 college kids had found their own way. I saw Colton inside the perimeter later, sitting against a wall, staring at the ground. His 2 friends beside him. They'd made it on their own. Greaves. I never saw Greaves at the school. Never saw the pickup truck. Never learned what happened to him, whether he found safety somewhere else, or whether his dash for self-preservation delivered him to exactly the end he'd been so carefully trying to avoid. I don't think about him much. I think about him exactly enough. And Rackman. They separated him from us during screening. I saw 2 soldiers flank him, saw his hands go up, saw him comply without resistance. I walked over. I told the sergeant in charge that this man was with me, that he'd protected our group, that he was responsible for at least one life among us. The sergeant looked at Rackman's file. They had systems running, databases, partial networks I hadn't expected, and said the warrant was still active, that they had a holding area for detainees. Rackman looked at me from between the 2 soldiers. His face was unreadable. Then he said, "It's fine, Sergeant. System's still running after all. Some of it." He smiled, and the smile had something in it I couldn't identify. Resignation, maybe, or a dark amusement at the circularity. From one cell to another, from one custodian to the next. I said, "For what it's worth." He said, "I know." They took him. I never saw him again either. The school held about 400 people when we arrived, and it was still receiving. The National Guard unit, elements of the 28th Infantry Division, Pennsylvania Guard, deployed across a wide radius, had established the site 36 hours prior. They had generators, water purification, medical supplies, MREs. They had walls that were chain link and concrete rather than commercial glass. They had communication with other sites, with command structure, with something resembling the remnants of coordination. I spent 2 days there before they organized a convoy south toward a larger FEMA installation. During those 2 days, I ate, drank, slept under a roof with functioning lights, and spoke to almost no one. The magnitude of what had happened, to the town, to the world, to me, sat on my chest like something physical. I'd lost my station. Lost officers I'd worked beside for years and would never find out what happened to. I'd killed a woman who'd come to me for help. I'd released a violent offender from custody because I needed his body between mine and the dead. I'd left a building I'd sworn to serve from, running in the dark through streets I used to patrol. And I'd kept 14 people alive. Plus the 3 who'd split off and made it on their own. 17 out of 20. Greaves was the only confirmed loss, and even that wasn't confirmed. 90%. By the standards of that week, in that town, it was a miracle. But it didn't feel like one. Miracles feel like grace, like something given. What we did felt like what it was. Labor and violence and fear, strung together by decisions made with insufficient information under impossible pressure, yielding an outcome that could easily have been otherwise. I think about the station sometimes. I imagine it's still there, Polk and 7th, with its shattered front doors and our barricade still piled inside. Filing cabinets and desks and a heavy wooden table, all pushed together by desperate hands. A building designed to process paperwork and hold drunks overnight, asked to be a fortress. It did its best with what it was. So did we. The last thing I'll say is this. People ask me about Rackman when I tell this story. They ask if I regret letting him out. They ask if he was really dangerous, if I was foolish, if he could have turned on us. Yes, to all of it. He was dangerous. I was possibly foolish. He could have turned on us at any moment. The fact that he didn't, that he carried a man on his back for 6 blocks and fought the dead with his bare hands, doesn't retroactively justify the decision. It means I got lucky. The decision itself was a gamble made by a man who'd run out of safer options. But here's what stays with me. In that last stretch, when the dead were close and the mother was holding her screaming child, and everyone was on the edge of breaking into a run that would have scattered us and killed half, Rackman was the one who held the line. He stood in the gap. He didn't have to. He had no badge, no oath, no duty. He had a felony warrant and bad history, and every reason to disappear into the dark. He stayed. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it redeems anything, or changes who he was, or what he'd done. I know it happened. I know 14 people are alive, in part because of it. I know the world ended, and the categories I'd used to sort people, criminal, civilian, officer, threat, dissolved like they'd never been real in the first place. Maybe they hadn't been. Maybe they were just the scaffolding a functioning society provides so that we don't have to look at each other directly and decide, moment by moment, what a person is worth. The scaffolding is gone now. We're all looking at each other. And the things I see don't fit in the boxes I used to carry. I'm still a sergeant. They tell me the rank transfers, that there's a provisional law enforcement structure being built in the safe zones, that my service record followed me south to the FEMA site and beyond. They offered me a position. I took it. I wear the badge again, though it's different now. New authority, new jurisdiction, new understanding of what the badge actually means. It means I stand in the gap, like Rackman did, like Cyrus did, like Vent, who was 5 months out of the academy and never wavered. It means I decide who gets in the door, and I live with what follows. The station is gone. The world I policed is gone. But the question underneath it all, who do you protect, and what will you become to do it? That question survived everything. I answer it every day. I don't always like the answer, but I show up. I stand post. And when the next alarm sounds, because it always does, because that's the world now, I move toward it, and I do what the moment requires, and I try to bring everyone home. Not all of them, not always, but as many as I can carry.